So welcome everyone. We have the special honor of a capstone presentation this evening. Welcome to MCM candidate Nicole Woodall. Welcome to Dr. Alex Sevigny, the capstone supervisor, and welcome to second reader Dr. Terry Flynn. My name is Josie Cassano-Rizzuti and will be the capstone chair this evening. Nicole will be presenting Cutting the Cord to the Gas Tank and Plugging In, commercializing social listening to support the electric vehicle industry. Nicole, a reminder that you will have 25 minutes to present your capstone, and then you will have 25 minutes to answer questions from the committee. Once that is completed, all attendees, with the exception of the committee members, will be placed in a breakout room while the committee deliberates. When the committee has completed the deliberations, everyone will be brought back for the announcement. The defense will be recorded, and after editing will be posted on our MCM website. So that is how the evening will progress. The floor is now open to Nicole. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I just realized I wasn't sharing my screen.
Hold on, I gotta give you it. Oh no, I had it. Wait. No. Okay. Hold on a second. I've got technical issues here. There you go. Okay.
It's been a while since I've used Zoom, since we're a Teams organization. Sorry, Terry, we should have checked this while we were chatting. How do I share?
There should be a share button that you can just share your screen.
Yeah,
right in the middle.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
Right at the bottom.
Okay, can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for so much for taking time out of your day to attend my capstone. Today, I'll be walking you through a very data-heavy content analysis capstone. While this was not a traditional content analysis, as I focused heavily on the opportunity to leverage AI and machine learning using natural language processing over a very large data set. I'll be walking you through three core sections. The first is focusing on the research problem, the significance of and purpose of the study, and briefly touching on the literature review. I'll then focus more heavily on my research questions, the rigorous methodology, and how I completed my my data analysis using Python. And then finally, I'll be getting into my insights, limitations, and some opportunities for commercialization. So the Ford Model T, televisions, personal computers, smartphones, these products have profoundly transformed our lives beyond being consumer products, spawning national infrastructure, services, and product extensions that have evolved into economies of themselves. Globally, we're going through another transformative revolution, and that's the transportation electrification. As you've all seen in the news of late, we cannot help but escape the headline. We can't help escape the headlines about the ill effects of global warming. Greenhouse gas emissions have been a significant source of discussion in recent years, both in Canada and around the globe. According to Natural Resources Canada, transportation accounts for 1/4 of Canada's greenhouse gases, and almost half is attributed to cars and light-duty vehicles. With growing concern from governments worldwide about our greenhouse gases, the commercialization of zero-emission vehicles, or ZEVs, is finally underway. Zero-emission vehicles are known as battery electric vehicles, or BEVs, while plug-in hybrids are known as FEVs. There is a third type of vehicle called a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle, but these are still highly limited and no manufacturers are producing commercial volumes at this stage. However, charging infrastructure is actually one of the primary issues throttling EV adoption, and that is related to the types of charging infrastructure. Natural Resources Canada defines 3 distinct types of charging infrastructure: a level 1, which uses a standard 120-volt outlet in your house, a level 2, which uses a 240-volt outlet, which is usually installed in garages, but it's a specialty plug or places of business, and finally, DC fast charging, which is primarily used on transport corridors and other public spaces. So collectively, governments and automakers have spent $425 billion US in 2022 alone in vehicle electrification. And that's an increase in approximately 50% from the year prior. And global vehicle purchases exceeded 10 million. Global electric vehicle purchases exceeded 10 million for the first time in 2022, according to the International Energy Agency. While the democratization of electric vehicles has been underway for many years, government investment has accelerated, with countries like Canada and the US finally playing catch up to Europe and China. In 2021, Prime Minister Trudeau announced 100% of all car and passenger trucks sold in Canada would be electric by 2025. This has been further amplified by the commitments of the federal government in the 2023 budget, as the clean economy is considered one of the most pivotal national strategies since last century's investment in the Transcontinental Railway. As of August 2023, EY reported that Canada now ranks 9th in its global EV readiness index as a result of increased adoption and supply. So I wanted to explore whether I could use a data-first approach focusing on content analysis to identify opportunities and trends to support emerging businesses and those looking to develop tertiary commercialization opportunities to support EVs. In 2021, as part of Dr. Sevigny's data science class, I embarked on my first attempt at doing something in this space, and given the positive feedback from him, I wanted to assess whether I could take this research further. So this combines many of my career passions, including strategic communications, digital strategy, data-driven decision-making, and entrepreneurialism. And it's very clear with a lot of research, me doing a lot of research out there, that there's very little academic research in this space because it's moving so quickly and rapidly. So my literature review was broken up into two parts, one which was around the strategic communications piece, and the other side was around the transition towards electric vehicles and the momentum behind that. So today's digimodern society has resulted in societal discourse emerging in online forums and across social media, with digital publics emerging. So I wanted to look at what are some of the levers within strategic communications in the digital age. That includes looking at the emergence of digital publics, two-way symmetrical communication, dialogic theory, as well as Gruning's discussion around the ROI of public relations. On the flip side, I really wanted to look at the environment and the transition to EVs. So that included the economics of global warming, global vehicle electrification, Canadian public policy and incentives, and the diffusion of innovation within the consumer base. Across the globe, scientists and environmentalists have been ringing the alarm bells about greenhouse gases since about the 70s. And there's been a lot of traction since about 1992 with the UN General Assembly. The planet's heating has demonstrated that we've started to see a lot of ramifications for humanity, including agriculture, forestry, sea level rise, human morbidity, devastating weather patterns. So the UN gained a lot of momentum in 1992 with the UN framework on Convention on Climate Change, followed by the 1997 Kyoto Protocol. And in 2015, Canada and another 195 nations signed on to the Paris Agreement at COP21, committing to a peak emission by 2025 with a 43% decline by 2030. A pivotal shift occurred about 8 years ago. Cumulative electrification of transport investments has accelerated, with China leading the way. According to the International Energy Agency, China accounted for almost 60% of all electric vehicles sold globally, and we've now hit a tipping point in Europe with their Fit for 55. So Biden has also committed that 50% of all new vehicles sold will be EV by 2030, and ZEVs just crossed the 23% boundary in the EU. Consumer adoption in Canada has been rapidly increasing, as well as a recent report from CAA, Voice of the Canadian EV Driver. 97% of current EV drivers are extremely likely to purchase another EV with an NPS score of 87. And StatsCan has reported that we have just crossed the threshold earlier this year of 8.6% of total vehicle registrations. Canadian government policy varies widely across the country. We do not have enough charging stations to currently meet the demands that we need to reach in terms of charging infrastructure. Canada currently needs, by 2025, one public charger per 20 vehicles on the road. And right now in Ontario, we're at 0.72 per 10,000 individuals. And the other piece to acknowledge is just there's a wide array of federal and provincial incentives to support adoption. So I had 3 specific research questions. How and to what extent are EV makes and models discussed in Canadian news media, social media sites, blogs, and forums? How and to what extent are EV governmental incentives and political identities being discussed? And third, how and to what extent is there a possible correlation between social media discourse of EV makes and models and the Ontario government green vehicle registration data? So I used 3 primary sources of data. The first is Meltwater, which is a robust consumer intelligence platform that can collect a broad swath of publicly available consumer discourse that can be mined for topics. I took an iterative approach to but really built out a robust keyword selection that looked at terminology related to EVs and all of the synonyms. I looked at all of the political parties and leaders. I also looked at all of the government incentives and rebates. And so I really delved into that. And this goes back from, I backdated this research from data collected in January of 2019, right through to June of 2023. So I had a good solid runway of data. Likewise, I was able to successfully get an FOI completed with the Ontario government MTO. And so I looked at all net new green vehicle registrations during that same time period. So I was able to gather make, model, client type, city, gender, purchase and lease, motive power, body type, and class of vehicle. And finally, I used the open government data set provided by Statistics Canada, which provides BEV and FEV registrations at an aggregate level for each of the provinces and territories. Given that this capstone is focused on content analysis, I did not require research ethics approval for this. None of the content was behind a paywall or any sort of login. So this was all truly data that was in the public domain. Once the data was collected from Meltwater, I then used Python and Jupyter Notebook. And before the data even went into Python and Jupyter Notebook, I made effort to anonymize the data so that only opening text and headline, hit sentence, URL, domain, page type, and source, and thread entry type was included in the data frame. So using computer-assisted text analysis, primarily the natural language toolkit within Python, word tokenization and stemming were applied to the full text object, allowing the unstructured data to be more readily scanned and categorized. I completed 278 unique keyword clusters, not including relevant synonyms and potential misspellings in the one-hot encoding output. And much of this analysis uses a thematic approach, focusing on detecting the frequency of keywords and themes. In addition, a network approach was also applied, connecting objects to one another using latent Dirichlet allocation. Additional Python coding was also undertaken to provide further insights by analyzing text statistics and generating additional visualizations. So in addition to the NLTK library, which was used, I also used Vader, which is the Valence and Aware Dictionary and Sentiment Reasoner, designed by MIT for open source sentiment analysis. I used Spacey, TextBlob, LDA, which is latent Dirichlet allocation, using PYLDA viz for visualization. And I finally used the named entity recognition from Stanford as well to support the topic modeling exploration. And finally, Matplotlib and Seaborn, which are 2 additional Python libraries for visualization. So from an exploratory content categories, I looked at electric vehicles, makes and models, government policy and investments around charging. So that included individual identities as well as political parties. I looked at rebates and incentives. I looked at geolocation, wherever there was a geolocation tag, but then I also looked at all of the provinces, territories, and cities that had over 50,000 population as well. Finally, to capture all of the appropriate model specifics, I wanted to make sure that I reduced null values. So the only data that finally made it into the data frame is I completed the word tokenization across everything. And so each record had to meet both a combined EV term as well as a geolocation. So it had to meet both of those before I could move that record into the analysis. So that took my data set from 1.9 million records down to 286,000 records. So that took it down to 14.8% of the initial meltwater record count. So moving into results and insights, I'm going to just take you through some very quick top line results. At a high level, news source mentions could be tracked using meltwater dating back to 2019, with substantive year-over-year growth in EV mentions and news, with 25% year-over-year growth in 2020, 39% in 2021, 34% in 2022, and again, 22% growth half year over half year for the first half of 2023. In Ontario, by and large, is the dominant conversation driver in terms of geolocation at the province and territory level, with over 45% of the discourse. And that it jumps if I exclude news to 48.9%. 4 provinces represent 87% of the discourse. That's Ontario, BC, Alberta, and Quebec. So one of the other pieces that I wanted to do before even getting into the research questions was look at whether or not the StatsCan registration data of BEVs and FEVs also correlated with the mentions over those same time periods. And what was interesting was that BEV mentions were highly correlated at a statistically significant level of 0.863 with a p-value of 0.001. And so this really, is quite interesting because it reinforces Grunig's assertion that the PR function can potentially demonstrate an ROI. I also looked at parts of speech tagging to understand grammatical structure. These are linguistic markers that can sometimes help with more advanced techniques. And so I was able to start looking at the emergence of proper pronouns. Tesla emerges as a frequently mentioned brand, but so too does Ford, Hyundai and its Ioniq model, as well as Kia, demonstrating that lower cost brands are really being mentioned at a high level of frequency. Meanwhile, the frequency of battery plant, government, and manufacturing are also a high volume of nouns that we see emerging. I also looked at stop words by channel source. So stop words don't include the most popular and frequently used words in the English language, like the and. And so by eliminating those stop words, you can start to see what are the specific words that are emerging on your discourse. So using this, I was able to start to unpack that obviously Hyundai and Ioniq, again, are emerging in a number of places. So is battery, charging, and so forth. Finally, I was able to look at n-grams, which are strings of words together. So I looked at bigrams, which are 2 words, as well as trigrams, which are 3 words. And so I would have expected Tesla and model to emerge as a bigram, given the frequency with which Tesla is mentioned overall. But Hyundai and its Ioniq model, as well as Kia EV6 and Chevrolet and Bolt really emerged. I also used the Python LDA Viz machine learning, which is an interactive topic model visualization tool that starts to categorize keywords together. And so I was able to look at, and I'm just going to highlight this, it starts to unpack different themes and which keywords overlap. As I delve into research question 1, of the 43 BEV brands and FEV brands in this study, Tesla was overwhelmingly the dominant brand at a low of 23.2% of total brand mentions in 2021 and a high of 34.5% in the first half of 2023. So while Hyundai was consistently a dominant electric vehicle brand, since 2020, federal and provincial announcements related to manufacturer plant retooling for electric vehicles and battery manufacturing investment drove the increase in mentions, as well as started to drive the spikes for Volkswagen, Ford, and GM during 2022. At the model level, mentions of Tesla overpower all other emerging electric vehicle models over that same time period. So of the top 5 models, they represent, of all of the models, which are 121 in the entire study, 5 models represent 49.8% of the entire share of voice, which is somewhat alarming. And so Tesla's Model S, Model X, and Model 3, plus the Chevrolet Bolt and Kia EV6 make up that proportion. Coupling this on the brand share level, level share of voice with the model share of voice, the results clearly indicate that leaders in the electric vehicle sales race have solidified their position in the minds of electric vehicle consumers and have well-established EV credentials. A total of 121 models were tracked. And so it really demonstrates that this is going to be an uphill battle for new brands entering the marketplace, such as Polestar, Rivian, Fisker, Maple Majestic, and Karma. Some of the top-level research question insights that came out was that brand and model-specific dominance continues to diminish for Tesla, especially in comparison to the lower-cost models, which with value brands such as Hyundai, Nissan, and Chrysler really emerging, as well as Kia. So it really demonstrates that these are no longer, for the uber rich, or as Doug Ford would say, the millionaires. This is reinforced not only at the year-over-year trends and keywords on the channel level, but also when we're looking at the trends with the green vehicle MTO registration data. European manufacturers are also quickly catching up with a lot of reformatted vehicles for the North American marketplace. And so we're starting to see VW, Audi, and BMW really start to demonstrate some power and growth in terms of offering mid-range and luxury alternatives to Tesla. Finally, FEVs are also the middle ground alternative that's really a great opportunity to support the transition. Research question 2 is how and to what extent are EV government incentives and political identities being discussed? And what you'll see here on the next slide, I'm just mindful of time, is that it really is a conversation around investment, emissions, zero emissions, incentives. None of the keywords are related to manufacturing, sustainability, some of these sort of high-level nebulous strategies are long-term investments are in the minds of the consumer. This is really about what's going to hit their pocketbook at this stage. And so we see this emerging, and this is really where the dominant list discourse is around what's going to help the consumer right now in terms of affordability and whatnot. How and to what extent, again, further going into this question, I wanted to look at political identities as well as both parties and politicians. And by and large, it is all about the Liberals as well as Trudeau, and followed by Doug Ford and the provincial Conservative Party in Ontario. And that's just due to the necessity of the manufacturing industry in Ontario. They've had to do a lot together. the leader of the opposition, of the Conservatives, only ranks with 1.67% of the mentions related to government, which is really eye-opening for me. I'm going to, just mindful of time, I'm going to move through this slide, but I also looked at polarity and subjectivity of the discourse, and by and large, it was overwhelmingly neutral. Consumers do not perceive EVs to be a wedge issue in politics, so tangible government incentives and rebates carry the most weight. Finally, I looked at the correlation between discourse as well as government registration data, and BMW and Jeep were the only brands to demonstrate a very strong correlation. Hyundai and Ford demonstrated a moderate positive correlation. At the model level, it was a little bit different. Jeep Wrangler was the only model to have a strong correlation, followed by the Ford Mach-E Mustang, likely a result of their niche target audience. And that this data offers a novel approach to measuring consumer adoption. From a limitation standpoint, this was an English-only discourse measurement study. And so that obviously limits any of the French-speaking discourse around EV adoption. So that offers future opportunities. Social listening on meltwater has a limitation on the length of the sentence capture. So it might be interesting to explore this using another platform like Brandwatch, which will scrape a larger proportion of data in terms of the discourse. And then finally, this is really about an exploratory opportunity to leverage big data using machine learning for content analysis. Finally, from a commercialization standpoint, this is really an emergent opportunity. This is the intersection of strategic communications and data science. There's really no meaningful Canadian-specific research related to the EV industry looking at consumer adoption. Scope and scale of data mining opportunities really emerges for real-time intelligence. There's substantive coding that was completed, hundreds of hours of coding. It's almost scary how much I did, which I can delve into further for additional insights. And this also establishes a baseline for ongoing analysis to report on long-term adoption trends. Finally, this offers a lot of business opportunity for tertiary businesses, so keyword usage, brand, and model mentions, to support strategic investment with geo-targeting, as well as opportunity to use other government data sets. And finally, this really does support digital strategy and strategic communications applications, including SEO content strategies, platform and website targeting, including media buys, as well as keywords for benchmarking across a number of pieces. So finally, in wrap up, I would just like to acknowledge and recognize all of those people that have supported me, and over to you for questions. And I'm sorry I'm a minute late.
Okay, we open up questions from the committee.
Great. Great piece of work, Nicole. Really a lot of data and a lot of exploration. I mean, when having worked with you on along this journey, it's even though you've narrowed it a lot from where it started, it's still a very big project, and you pulled it off and actually came up with, I think, some very interesting insights. So some valuable insights. So my first question is about the limitations, right? What do you think that the time frame, what kind of an impact would the time frame, the sample frame, the time sample frame that you chose, how did that impact the data? Do you think you missed something by not going further back, or?
Part of it was actually just the function of the platform that I was using. So knowing that there were limitations, that meltwater could not go back further than 13 months, but it could collect just news data. There could potentially have been a longer time frame offered if I had only analyzed news and not anything else, in terms of just the social discourse, which would have changed the intent of the documentation. It would have been more of a media content analysis rather than a societal discourse in terms of adoption, and in terms of those conversations that are potentially happening more naturally and organically within the digital publics.
Yep, no, I agree. So one of the so many interesting correlations in the study. I mean, you touched on them during the presentation. One that jumped out to me was a correlation that really makes the case for public relations, right? And maybe you could unpack that one, the where we see the effects of communications on.
Yeah, so that one was interesting because I looked at the data from on a quarterly basis. So I had compared 17 quarters together with the StatsCan data against all of the mentions that were collected in meltwater. And so, you know, I didn't know it was one of those, oh, this was one of those interesting rabbit holes to go down that had nothing to do with one of the particular research questions. But I thought, oh, this might give some level of interest. And so at a macro level, I think the fact that it was so statistically significant was sort of eye-opening to me. And I remember in our conversation about whether I include it, you were, you know, quite surprised at how strong that correlation actually was. And that was at a 95% confidence level as well.
Yeah, remarkable. One last question and before I pass it on to Terry, is so what would you say the actionable component of these data is, right? Like what, because you've got all these insights, you've got insights for politicians, you've got insights for the industry, you've got insights for other researchers actually, because you've got some interesting, you've made some very interesting uses of share of voice as a research technique to predict, and you correlating it to vehicle registrations. I've never seen that done before. And it seems to be predictive, which is really cool if that holds, you know, with larger data set. So what is all this going towards proving? Like, what is it? Where does all this data tell us?
So for me right now, I think the opportunity is that there's a lot of people who actually don't know much about the electric vehicle industry, including a lot of the dealer networks. So they're not necessarily in the loop. You know, the large manufacturers, the OEMs that are making the vehicles are very focused on their supply chain. There's a lot of lags with supply chain, so we're not seeing necessarily the demand and supply in conjunction yet. And so people are waiting. They've got long lead times in order to get a vehicle. So I think as that starts to work out, this is information that is actually more useful at the lower levels, not maybe as much for the manufacturers themselves, but maybe part suppliers, as well as government, I think really could use this data to help maybe modify and pivot and evolve their incentives for consumers, because I think that is the core driver here. We know that, you know, Ford scrapped the rebate in Ontario because he said it was only people who bought Teslas or millionaires that were taking advantage of the rebate. So looking at, you know, household income and benchmarking along those lines, I think there's a lot of data here to be able to take it as a proof of concept, start to build out an API that can start to collect some of this data in real time, offers a great opportunity to be able to be a lot more responsive and be able to provide informed insights to teams or businesses that may not be able to afford it otherwise.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're onto something. I think it's a quick and dirty way of, a not very expensive way of getting a bead on public opinion. Yeah.
Mhm.
Pass it over to Terry.
Wow. That was overwhelming in terms of the data dump. So yeah, just amazing. First of all, just to see you doing this and talking like a Bay Street, Wall Street analyst and how you do that. So congratulations. You know your stuff, and you communicated very competently. So what would you say is the single most contribution in your study to the body of knowledge in the public relations field?
I would say that, especially I think the eye-opening piece around the correlation of that data is critical, but I haven't seen anything where someone's looking at societal discourse and consumer adoption or buying behavior. So I think we talked a lot through the program about the tension between marketing and strategic public relations. And I think this really makes the case that strategic communications professionals have a seat at the table for things like new product development and other sort of emerging opportunities to support that. So being able to convey this at all levels. I mean, I didn't even get into all of the other data that was coded around vehicle formats like hatchbacks versus SUVs or any of that. Like there's tons of that opportunity as well that can really play a role very proactively and also support marketing and support engineering teams and design, but being able to bring that data right to the forefront in very quick time and seeing how it's evolving, I think completely changes the landscape.
So the notion that, excellent communications tied with excellent brand support, marketing support can drive that share of voice, right?
Yeah.
Then create that level of it. So here's the dichotomy, here's the challenge with that notion. The thesis, your data proves that thesis wrong. Because what company has the largest share of voice?
Tesla.
Right. And Tesla has no public relations department. In fact, when you search on LinkedIn, there are more ex-Tesla CCOs than in most public relations. And he doesn't do any marketing or anything like that.
But
right?
I think in debate of that, Tesla's been losing market share consistently. So their share of voice is still high because they have a very polarizing leader who's off, blowing up spaceships and satellites over, he's
and platforms,
you name it. So I think he needs to be he and his leadership team need to be very conscious that they're very quickly losing ground to the other players. And so that innovative lead that he had is very quickly starting to diminish. And so are they going to be able to hold that without public relations? I'm not sure. And then just actually to go back to your initial question as well, Terry, I think this really goes to show, and I think I drank the Kool-Aid in Alex's class, communications professionals, full stop, have to embrace data science. They can't be scared of it. Yes, I know there's a whole, discussion around generative AI and how, systems are going to be writing our press releases for us and everything else. But actually, I think there's more opportunity on the data science side from a listening standpoint and to provide that two-way communication, establish some real data-driven insights on that two-way communication that's going to transform our ability to connect at the table.
Great. Thank you. Josie, over to you.
Hey, well, I have the wonderful opportunity to listen to all of the questions already. But first and foremost, Nicole, outstanding work in terms of picking a topic, research questions, and then even the sources of data, Statistics Canada, they were so fulsome. It looked like my steel marketing department, I'm not going to lie, had a feeling of a whole marketing department would develop a study like this. So very impressive. And Terry's comment about engineering new product development, that came to mind immediately for me. Boy, the engineers at ArcelorMittal would love to hear these things and understand those correlations and how communications and data science come together. And what impact that has. My mind did go at one point, and I'm just going to ask this question if it came to your mind, with, in particular, Tesla showing up in the way it did, the bias maybe people have because of his influence even on buying Twitter and X. Did that come to mind when you were doing the study, and how maybe the data is skewed because of that?
Well, I took quite a bit of effort to actually delete stuff that was not related to Tesla proper. So TSLA is the stock ticker.
Sure. Yeah.
And so obviously Tesla is big in investment circles. So that was intentionally excluded. I tried to exclude a lot of the other topics related to Elon, again, that his other business lines, so that it was trying to at least get from a purist standpoint down to the electric vehicles component. And so then taking the subsequent data cleanse, which meant that it had to meet the EV threshold mention, as well as a Canadian geography mention. I tried to strip out as much of that other unrelated content as I possibly could. It still could very well have skewed the data to a degree. I don't think there was any way I was going to be able to get around such a polarizing and dominant figure in sort of the global lexicon right now.
Yeah, you answered my question though, so it did, you did go to some effort to try to remove that bias that exists. So that also gives me a lot more confidence with the data. My last just surprise was the final question and how little impact the the discourse in the fields that you looked at, you looked at more than social media, you looked at all areas, had on the brand recognition. That last table, I would have expected more. And so only 2 of the brands correlated. So that was just a bit of a surprise for me. And I don't know if anyone else felt that as well.
I think, though, that is partially because of the supply chain issues. So a lot of the vehicles were announced during that time frame, but a lot of them also still hadn't been released. And there's huge wait lists for those vehicles. So I think the supply and demand tension is one of the pieces that we're still working through. And so if we were to redo that same correlation again at a later date, we might see a bit of a difference because there's more vehicles free flowing and being registered on a regular basis.
Okay. Yes, so that you're saying the limitations of supply are impacting. So maybe that correlation can't even show yet. It's probably stronger than, and what I was expecting is a stronger correlation. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
At the very least, it's a baseline. So if this data was to be conducted over subsequent terms, I think we'd be able to start seeing some of those changes.
Thank you. No further questions from me. We can open it up to anyone in the audience. If anyone has any questions.
Well, maybe we'll do one more round with just
Okay.
Alex and I,
Sorry.
and then we can
Yes. Sorry
do that.
forgetting the protocol. Go ahead, Alex.
No, it's totally okay. Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, actually. And I think there's a lot of factors. I wish that Ontario had the same system as they have in Norway, where as soon as a vehicle is registered, it pops up in the open data with full data, and anybody can access those data. And unfortunately, in Ontario, we don't. It's not quite like that. So, my question is, so how are you going to mobilize these data, this research? What are you going to do with it? Because there's so much here. I mean, you've got the makings of a full market research report from a content and analysis perspective of social and mainstream media, as well as with some really cool correlations to decision to purchase. You've got enough for a major market research report. So what next?
Yeah, and actually it's interesting because I think with your mentorship as well, and knowing that I am very passionate about EVs, I'm very passionate about entrepreneurship, and I think this is my moment. And so, I kind of feel like there's a massive career change that is about to occur. You're on mute, Terry.
Can't hear you.
Tesla doesn't have a CCO, so you can always apply for that job.
But he knows better than everybody, so I don't know if he'd be one to work.
My friend Simon Spruill started the Syracuse program with me, and lasted 8 months at Tesla in 2014.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he warned everybody else to stay away. So don't do that.
Yeah, I think, especially given that the US has a lot of lobby groups and intelligence, Ontario does have, and Canada does have some, but I think there's a huge opportunity for me to start shopping around some of this research at different levels, whether it's with government, whether it's with manufacturers, et cetera. So I think this is where the next few months is where I'm going to be doing a fair bit of reflection on when I'm going to be making this jump and what is the next appropriate step.
Yeah.
Manufacturers, I'd say, is a really government. I like both. You need to give it to both because it's both sides of the coin. You've shared both.
What about approaching the Electric Vehicle Society of Canada?
Oh, they're all on my list.
Never heard
And
of these before,
I don't know if you know this, but my husband also is, I've been also supporting him in creating a business that installs electric vehicle chargers, but also has it's specifically for retrofitting residential properties, but it's a modular system that also then leverages time of use charging. It can also then be integrated with battery backup and then with solar. So people don't need to move to a smart home all in one shot, but if they want to make the baby step of moving to an EV, it's fairly straightforward. And so, this market research intelligence can be its own standalone business. And I think that's where I'm sort of going with this.
Well, we should put you up for the Matt Stevens Electric Vehicle Society Howard Hutt Award for Excellence in the Achievement or Advancement of Electric Transportation. That's what I think we should do.
That sounds like a good one, Terry. Yes.
But I think what you could do though is not, because first of all, I think a general audience of PR types, like IBC Canada West, we're going out there. Your presentation would scare the shit out of them, right? it was just too much, right? They just don't
Yep.
even understand where to begin. And you say Python, they're thinking about a snake just wrapping around their neck, and it's all over that way. So, but I think you should use this case study as a very clarion call for why we need to be not just communication scientists, but data scientists as well.
Mhm.
And so, because this is really, really important stuff. This is really, really good, and can have an impact. I mean, I'm glad to hear that you're thinking about that. This could be a pivotal moment, that your household is electrified by this kind of opportunity, but you've gone through an exercise here. You've learned. You talked about this notion of how do we do it. One, yes, we have some disciples because you've gone through Alex's class, but there's a whole industry of people that don't have a clue, right? I just spoke to 200 emergency response people, communicators in Ottawa, and I asked them, how do you evaluate your crisis response? They don't, right? So, so research, evaluation, data, our industry is doomed.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, because I think Martin's class also really spoke to me. Finance as well. I would say I hand on heart a data nerd, completely, because I've been conducting social listening for well over a decade now. I was doing it in Australia for government there on a number of levels, whether it was emergency response, whether it was brand and crisis reputation management, but that was all grounded in data and making sure that it wasn't just anecdotal. So I think moving it into a more advanced analytics sort of space and having the confidence behind those numbers, I think that is a skill that every strategic communicator needs to be more comfortable with, not just the words.
Great. And we
Nicole,
have
remember your grade in finance was very high. She was, yes, one of her data query and data curiosity was very strong, and it's showing through as well. And I'm sure, Alex, you saw it as well in data science. You can see how it all merged here. One thing I'd like to recommend as well, don't forget about industry, to go to the industries and try to share this data at their conferences, because it would be extremely valuable while it's current. So there's a window here of opportunity for you in the next few months.
Correct. What I want to say, though, is we have an alum who's watching, and then we have one of our new MCM cohort members, Richmond Kielson, who's online as well. And I just hope this doesn't shake Richmond to the core to say, oh my God, what the heck is this? Am I in the wrong program here? You're in the right program. This is the kind of thing that you can do when you graduate as well. So why don't we go into conclave, Alex and Josie and I, so that we can then decide.